Our opening clip was from 2016 outside of Trump Tower, but it captures several recent polls showing that the majority of Americans, especially independents, want convicted felon Trump to drop out of the race, and they refuse to vote for him. Despite that, Biden's approval ratings remain historically low, largely because, as I've been saying on the show for years now, Biden's disastrous Attorney General, Merrick Garland, is the absolute worst person for this moment of crisis in America. Just like Ulysses S. Grant was the right person for that moment of crisis in America, Merrick Garland's the exact opposite of Nazi hunter Ulysses S. Grant. Garland waited out the clock for 2 crucial years, allowing the coup plotters to go free, creating a crisis of hyper-normalization in America, where we all go about our business living with this growing dread and disillusionment. We witnessed with our own eyes and ears that Trump and his family tried to violently overthrow our democracy. They full-on had a tailgate party and a war room set up for weeks, steps from the White House at the Willard Hotel. Yet they're free, enriching themselves, trying to complete the coup. They started when they came to power in 2016 with the Kremlin's help. None of this is normal. Welcome to Gaslit Nation. I'm Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine. A genocide so cruel and destructive, the Kremlin said, let's do that again. And that's what they're doing in Ukraine now. We are diving headfirst, like a Russian whistleblower thrown from a window, into the never-ending circus that is Donald Trump's legal storm. Specifically, we'll be exploring the cynicism surrounding whether America's most famous Klansman will ever actually see the inside of a prison cell. Spoiler alert, the answer is a resounding maybe not, but he must. And if he doesn't, our democracy is in even bigger trouble than it already is now. Americans have become so disillusioned, they expect Trump to walk free, sentenced to maybe probation, which allows him to continue campaigning for president. The absurdity of this takes a heavy toll on the American psyche. It costs us faith in our institutions, which are already crumbling and complicit. The bottom line is this: a Russian asset should never have been allowed to come anywhere near the White House in 2016. Donald Trump is a major national security failure by the FBI, James Comey's FBI, the CIA, and Obama's foreign policy team, as well as, of course, Republicans that rallied around him and failed to bring him to justice in 2 different impeachment trials. The establishment wants to memory hole much of this because most of those responsible, like Comey, live off of book royalties from major publishers and are paid analysts on cable TV. Gaslit Nation has the receipts in our transcripts at gaslitnationpod.com. And investigative journalist Craig Unger, an upcoming guest at our live taping on June 25th for our Patreon community, wrote 2 books about it: House of Trump, House of Putin, and American Compromise. We're here to ground you in the bigger picture. Trump is a Russian asset developed for years by Kremlin cutouts, and his former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, is a longtime Kremlin operative that built pro-Kremlin parties in Ukraine that are just like MAGA in Congress. If you want to know what Manafort did all those years in Ukraine, look at the Kremlin disinformation agents in Congress, like J.D. Vance and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Manafort built up the Ukrainian version of that and brought Trump to power to further build the American version. Why? The Kremlin is his bread and butter. Plus, he had to pay off debt for all the money he stole, borrowed from one of the most ruthless Russian oligarchs, Oleg Deripaska. You don't lose a massive amount of money given to you by Deripaska and get to live unless you're a reliable tool of the Kremlin. And they know they can depend on you to deliver. And that is exactly what Paul Manafort did for the Kremlin in unleashing the anti-American terrorist known as MAGA, who is longtime friend and neighbor in Trump Tower, Donald Trump. Manafort unleashed that same divide and conquer strategy on Ukraine. to weaken it from within, to bring traitors to power through gaslighting and disinformation. And it works. The major difference is that Ukraine had the wisdom to ban those Kremlin parties, to kick out the traitors from power or send them to prison. In America, we let them run for president. And their co-conspirators who planned for months to violently overthrow our democracy also get to run free. Sure, around 1,000 MAGA foot soldiers are in prison for January 6th, but the coup plotters, they're still out there, working hard to overthrow our democracy. Michael Flynn is on a tour of the US, getting the foot soldiers ready. And Steve Bannon is on his podcast, getting the foot soldiers ready. They're getting their stormtroopers ready as an intimidation tactic, threatening us with violence should Trump go to prison, terrorizing poll workers, trying to suppress the vote in close districts needed to win the Electoral College. And by the way, I want to pause here to remind you, if you haven't yet, go back and listen to our recent episode with the boring but important title, Reform the Electoral College. The outdated system of the Electoral College is a major national security vulnerability, which makes it way too easy for our foreign-backed enemies like MAGA to steal elections. There's a reason why Paul Manafort gave sensitive polling data on key districts to a known Russian spy who was his longtime associate in Ukraine, Konstantin Kilimnik. And with this new polling, just look at ABC News, for example, 16% of Republicans and 52% of independents say that Trump should drop out. So how can they win the Electoral College? They're going to have to pull out all the stops to steal it like they did in 2016, as shown in the Mueller report and the bipartisan Senate intelligence report. So what do? Round up all the traitors and throw them in prison, as Ukraine did? Ban all disinformation TV networks and media, like Fox News, like Ukraine did? I wish. That's one of the many reasons MAGA hates Ukraine, because Ukraine forces accountability. Ukraine stands up to the Kremlin and exposes it for the terrorist state that it is, and has the moral courage to stand up to their traitors, whereas we're continuously getting steamrolled by ours. And I've been saying for years now, what's long hurt Biden's approval ratings is worthless Merrick Garland and the impotent DOJ enabling all this. Americans cannot stand this dangerous lack of accountability, where all we get is accountability theater, bread and circus on TV, as the mainstream media breathlessly covers the scandals and no one does anything about the crime. It's the hyper-normalization I warned about last fall. Our democracy is already lost if Trump doesn't serve prison time. Think about it. More gang leaders in the Watergate plot went to prison, served time in prison, than for Russiagate and January 6th. I'm talking about the plotters, the generals in that war of corruption. Take into account that Watergate was largely seen as a demoralizing lack of injustice because Nixon was pardoned and the average prison sentence was something like months to a few years. America felt kicked in the balls by what they saw as a lack of accountability for Watergate. Gerald Ford rightfully lost re-election for pardoning Nixon, gaslighting America with his pardon that said, quote, "The tranquility to which this nation has been restored by the events of recent weeks could be irreparably lost." The only reason there was a moment of normalcy, a moment of so-called tranquility for several weeks, was because criminal mastermind, wannabe dictator Richard Nixon had been indicted and faced trial. For a moment, everything felt right in the world. Then Ford spun the world upside down. Ford set a dangerous precedent by pardoning Nixon, and that's been the norm ever since. The criminals undermining our democracy get away with threatening our sovereignty and therefore the stability of the world. Manafort and Stone, who came up through the criminal cult of Nixon as young sociopathic operatives, would go on to bring an even worse criminal to power. So the warning is loud and clear. Trump must go to prison. No accountability leads to larger and more dangerous crimes. Trump and his crime machine are worse than Nixon because Nixon escaped prison. Nixon crawled so Trump could run. That is why Trump must go to prison, for the safety of our future, of every American, the world. This isn't complicated. But the Bill Maher industrial complex wants you to think it is. And they want you to think it's hopeless because they're rich and white. And none of this affects them other than boosting their ratings. Since accountability theater sells. All the scandal, no jail time. We don't accept that. And here's Bill Maher on an all-white male panel reminding us yet again why all-white male panels are a menace to society.
I would really be shocked if this judge gave him a prison sentence for this.
I mean, MAGA Nation will go nuts. I don't know if that's a reason to or not to do something, but they will.
Yeah, but one of the things about this apocalyptic language that you hear from all of these, the Amen chorus, is they really are inviting violence. And that's a big concern of mine. And Trump is completely unrestrained in suggesting that maybe that's appropriate. I mean, he hints that all the time. That's how he got in trouble on January 6th. And he's doing it again because I think he's more desperate now than he was then.
But if they put him in jail, I know it'll happen because the judge's name was Juan.
Yes.
Everything becomes racial in this country. You know, that's partly because of our horrible, despicable racial past, partly because some of that racism lives on in the president, and some of it because the far left makes everything racial. But that's what it's going to be. A civil war in this country, I'm sorry to say, becomes a race war. That's the sad truth about this country. And if they put him in jail, I mean, that's the first thing his supporters are going to say is, oh, that's what it is.
Well, that's the first thing
a black
he will
district attorney, you know, all these people who are the district attorneys, they're black. The judge was not white. This is what it is.
So let's look at Bill Maher. Bill Maher likes to think of himself as George Carlin, but he's everything George Carlin warned us about. Maher recently claimed that if Trump is sentenced to prison, there's going to be civil war. Where have you been, Bill Maher? There's already a civil war against us, backed by the Russians. He goes on to warn that MAGA's civil war will become a race war. Spoken like a rich, cloistered white man, these Rambo cosplay idiots have a civil war fetish and don't need an excuse to unleash domestic terrorism. They've been doing it since the founding of our country, and most recently, since the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, which killed 19 children. And since then, their white supremacist domestic terrorism has only gotten worse, leading to several warnings over the past decade alone by the FBI, as Trump rose to power on a groundswell of racist support through the birther movement, challenging the very legitimacy of the first Black president, putting a target on his head and his family. We've been living with their terrorism for years now. It's all been ramping up for years now. You don't think my Jewish friends think about the Tree of Life synagogue mass shooting by a Trump supporter when they drop their kids off at Jewish school or Jewish daycare. Remember when a MAGA supporter shot up a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, gunning down several Black people? I was at a birthday party in Brooklyn, and a Black mom was talking about how she has to take extra precautions because Trump supporters are hunting Black people. They already started a civil war, race war. What else are they going to do? Show up for work on Juneteenth? Everywhere Trump campaigned in 2016 saw a spike in violence. Several dozens of acts of terror in America can be attributed to Trump supporters, and that's according to a now old 2020 investigation by ABC News. That was all a dress rehearsal for January 6th, getting Trump's private army built and ready. So no, the danger level doesn't spike if Trump goes to prison. What changes is that Americans will be shocked, and maybe we'll finally feel some relief that there is some justice in the world. For a moment, we'll get a glimpse of normalcy. Most importantly, as anyone who has ever stood up to a bully knows, the only way forward is to set boundaries and enforce those boundaries. That is how you demoralize and contain Trump and his sociopathic crime cult. The thing Trump fears most is accountability. Getting away with crimes is literally Trump's brand. That's what he's campaigning off of. His supporters throw money at him, even to pay his legal bills, because they all get off on seeing him live above the law, because that's what they want to do. That's why they support him. It was the same with Hitler. They got a surge of pride and power, feeling invincible, feeling free of societal norms. That's the appeal. When they talk about freedom, they mean freedom from empathy, freedom from the collective good, freedom from having to care about others. They see, for instance, having to wear a mask, the mask mandates from the early days of the pandemic, as a violation of their freedom. Remember that? Trump supporters died en masse from COVID because of freedom. It was the perfect metaphor for how ultimately their greed and selfishness will make them self-destruct. Ultimately, we need each other. Civilization was born out of cooperation and working together. They want to blow all that up for their selfish individualism, which is a pathological way of thinking. It's not thinking. They want to be able to fuck a porn star when their wife just had a baby instead of taking care of her and the child. That is the entire appeal of Trump. And that is why he must go to prison, to show consequences for trying to live above the law. And if he doesn't go to prison, I mean this very seriously, God help us. As for Trump, he claims he's okay with going to jail or being under house arrest. Yeah, we know, because his buddy Paul Manafort committed crimes while under house arrest. Manafort got caught obstructing justice. He and his Russian spy, Klimnik, tried to coach witnesses on what to say to the feds, all while Manafort was under house arrest. There are no half measures with these people. They need to be locked away in prison, not on house arrest in Mar-a-Lago, crashing weddings and hanging out with foreign adversaries and spies in the ballroom, showing off all the stolen documents the feds failed to see. Look at the recent reporting from ProPublica on how shameless they are. ProPublica just came out with a damning investigation showing how 9 witnesses in the criminal cases against Trump got major financial gifts, including large raises from his company, new jobs. One received a cushy board seat at Trump's money laundering operation known as Truth Social. Trump and his goon squad are obstructing justice, buying off witnesses because they keep getting away with it. This is how they operate. This is always how they've operated, how they've made their fortune. And no one bothered to stop them because Trump was a colorful mascot on TV, pretending to be a successful businessman. In reality, he was totally dependent on Russian dirty money because no credible institution would lend to him. James Comey, who repeatedly declined to protect us from the Russians bringing Trump to power in 2016. No, seriously, the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, wrote 2 public letters calling Comey out in the months leading up to the election. But misogyny is a pathological addiction, and Comey was doped up on his misogyny, calling out Hillary Clinton over utter bullshit while literally declining on several occasions to dare call out Trump and the Russians. James Comey was inexplicably on TV the other day talking about how Trump could be kept in a large trailer out on a lawn in a fenced-off area, basically glamping, getting the presidential suite of glamping in prison. None of that will work either. Trump needs to be forced into the general prison population, no access to hair dye or bronzer. For the first time in his life, Trump needs to be treated like everybody else. You don't coddle criminals, or you end up with more criminals in the White House. There's also some chatter in the media, independent media, more like hopeful thinking chatter, that Trump may flee the country, like Viktor Yanukovych, the Ukrainian Trump. And that would be great. They could be together in exile in Russia. Trump, Jared, Ivanka, Melania, put them all on a plane with a one-way ticket, send them to Russia. They're already shallow, greedy, fake, and materialistic, like the Russian ruling class. They'll fit right in. Ivanka can sit in Putin's chair like she did the last time she visited Moscow. I'm totally fine with him fleeing the country. I think between now and especially if he loses the election, he's a flight risk and he can just go to Russia. Russians will love it, and so will we. As for the Kremlin, they're feeding into the grievance politics, riling up the martyr syndrome of Trump and his base, claiming Trump's rivals are desperate to stop him by politically persecuting him. Sending Trump to prison, once again, is urgent and so urgent. Like, there's no other option but prison for this man, because that would also send a strong message to Putin that no one is above the law. And it will remind Putin that the prison at the Hague is waiting for him. Let's check on Trump and Putin's ally in Israel, a fellow node in the transnational crime syndicate we're up against. And that's Israeli Trump, Netanyahu, and his ruling coalition of Stephen Millers. President Joe Biden announced a ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas. Biden's plan involves a full and complete ceasefire, the withdrawal of Israeli forces from populated areas in Gaza, and a hostage exchange. It aims to deliver hundreds of thousands of temporary shelters and surge humanitarian aid into Gaza. However, the plan's rollout has been mired in confusion and resistance from Israeli officials. Netanyahu hasn't publicly backed it, and far-right members of his government have threatened to leave if he supports the truce. This is obviously a delicate situation. Massive protests against Netanyahu and his government continue across Israel, with families of hostages urging Netanyahu to accept the peace deal. Instead, ultranationalist and convicted terrorist Ben-Gvir, the head of Israel's security, which armed and encouraged greater settlement violence across the occupied West Bank, recently ran away from a released Israeli hostage who had spent months in Gaza and whose husband remains a hostage of Hamas. Ben-Gvir ran from her, rather than, just like Trump, face accountability. Here's a clip from CNN on how Netanyahu and his ruling coalition of extremists rather cling to power than end the war, which gives you a glimpse of the chaos and destruction of what a second and endless Trump regime would look like.
The Israeli prime minister has spent the last couple of days really walking away from some of the key parts of this deal, indicating that this will not lead to an end of the war, which was very much the way that President Biden tried to frame the deal on Friday. And the Israeli prime minister is doing that for one key reason, and that's because two far-right members of his governing coalition have threatened to topple the government altogether if the Israeli prime minister moves forward with this deal. But at the same time, there are now new concerns, Wolf, inside the Israeli government, according to two sources who I spoke with, concerns that the Israeli prime minister is in fact undermining the very fabric of this deal and the way in which it's being sold to Hamas by the mediators, by focusing so much on the fact that he will not allow this to lead to an end of the war until all the conditions of this war are met, meaning the destruction of Hamas. There is a key part of this deal that is very much intended to be ambiguous about how exactly you go from a 6-week ceasefire, one that can be extended for weeks or months even, and ultimately leading to a longer term, perhaps even a permanent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas.
And yet, Netanyahu, that war criminal wanted for arrest by the ICC, is going to address our Congress while Trump remains free. Several members of Congress, of course, on the Democratic side, because Republicans see Israel as their key to bringing Jesus back. I did a whole breakdown of evangelicals and Israel in a recent episode. I'll link to in the show notes. So Republicans are fully on board with war criminal Netanyahu addressing Congress. Democrats are not. They're accusing Republicans of bringing Netanyahu in to be provocative, to highlight divides in their party. Obviously, Schumer could say no. Schumer would never do that because that's just not Schumer. He doesn't go out on a limb for what's right, typically. He won't even meet with progressive activists in his own state. He's really reluctant to do so. He's establishment through and through. And I'll link to a big Guardian investigation showing that the number of members of Congress that receive the most funding from Israeli groups tend to be establishment members of the Democratic Party. Well, many are talking about doing a big internal boycott. They're also debating going to the speech and disrupting it. And they don't want Congress to just be a sea of smiling Republican evangelical death cult faces. They also want to be present to confront Netanyahu to his face. I don't know what that would look like from a Democratic Congress. I would love to see it. So that's what many Democrats are weighing, whether to boycott all out or whether to attend and do something in his presence to show that they do not tolerate his war for power, pleading a war for power. and how atrocious he's been to the hostages, the families themselves, the police brutality against them in Israel, and so on. There's a long list on that. I'll link to some sources in the show notes. Netanyahu, once again, if you don't support Trump, you cannot support Netanyahu. He's one of the worst things that has happened to the fragility of democracy in Israel. And it's just he needs to go yesterday. One member of Congress, of course, Senator Bernie Sanders, has already said that he will not attend. And Sanders produced this statement, which I will play now.
The leadership of Congress has invited Prime Minister Netanyahu for a joint address before Congress. I'm not going. I'll tell you why. Israel had every right in the world to defend itself against the horrific Hamas terrorist attack of October 7th. But you know what? Israel did not have the right under Netanyahu's right-wing extremist leadership to go to war against the entire Palestinian people. They did not have the right to kill or injure 5% of the population of Gaza, 60% of whom are women, children, and the elderly. Did not have a right to destroy massive amounts of housing, the civilian infrastructure, water, sewage, electricity, bomb every university in Gaza. Did not have the right to do that. And they certainly do not have the right to use starvation as a means of war. Right now, tens and tens of thousands of children in Gaza are facing starvation, malnutrition, and famine. That is wrong. That is unacceptable. You do not honor a leader who is doing these terrible things to the people of Gaza. So no, I will not be attending that session.
Netanyahu's speech right now to Congress is expected to be June 13th. That date can move around some, given the trouble with the scheduling. Whenever it happens, we'll brace for it. We'll get through it. And I hope Democrats with moral courage stand up and confront him to his face. And I hope they do it in a way that really shows the rest of the world that we are trying to stop this war that has gone way too far. And we are trying to force his coalition of terrorists to get on a path to peace with this new ceasefire plan, which gives a chance to finally get on the path towards a two-state solution. It's not going to happen overnight. The grassroots on both sides need to be supported and amplified to show that another way is possible than repeating these cycles of generational conflict that just further the trauma, further the mass murder, and so on. So thank you for everyone who is standing up and demanding a permanent ceasefire and an end to this conflict. I'm going to address comments from our listeners in this week's bonus episode coming out Saturday morning. This episode had to get pushed back due to the exciting news of Trump finally officially being a convicted felon, as you can all understand. But now we'll be running it as a special bonus show called Israel and Palestine. Listeners respond. Thank you to everyone who submitted your comments. I always love hearing from you. And if there's anything we ever get wrong on this show, it's a labor of love by a tight-knit production team. You could always write to us at gaslightnation@gmail.com. That's gaslightnation@gmail.com. Now, to celebrate some good news, congratulations to Mexico for electing your first female president, as well as the first Jewish president, climate scientist Claudia Sheinbaum, a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, who was part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that won the 2007 Nobel Prize for its research into the climate crisis. Sheinbaum brings with her a master's degree from UC Berkeley, a progressive agenda, and a mandate to stand up against the brutal corruption across Mexico, where a female mayor, Yolanda Sanchez, was just gunned down after facing death threats and kidnapping. Another world is possible, and we're going to build it together. To remind us how, here's Harvey Milk from his famous "You've Got to Give Them Hope" speech at the San Francisco Gay Freedom Day Parade in 1978, where the rainbow flag of the LGBT liberation movement was flown for the first time.
Somewhere in Des Moines or San Antonio, there's a young gay person who all of a sudden realizes that she or he is gay, knows that if the parents find out, they'll be tossed out of the house. The classmates would taunt the child, and the Anita Bryans and John Briggs are doing their bit on TV, and that child has several options: staying in a closet, suicide, and then one day that child might open a paper and it says homosexual elected in San Francisco, and there are two new options. The option is to go to California, stay in San Antonio and fight. 2 days after I was elected, I got a phone call. The voice was quite young. It was from Altoona, Pennsylvania. And the person said, thanks. And you've got to elect gay people so that that young child and the thousands upon thousands like that child know that there's hope for a better world. There's hope for a better tomorrow. Without hope, not only gays, but those blacks and the Asians, the disabled, the seniors, the us's, without hope, the us's give up. I know that you cannot live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living. And you, you've got to give them hope. Thank you very much.
Gaslit Nation is a civic action podcast about the threat of fascism in America and around the world. We work to transform despair into progress, guided by historical mentors like Dorothy Thompson, Audre Lorde, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, Martin Luther King Jr., and George Orwell. The oligarchs at home and abroad are trying to grind us down, emotionally exhaust us, confuse and separate us. That's why Gaslit Nation is here to help you stay grounded in the truth that another world is possible. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have lots of events at Gaslit Nation. We're phone banking with our friends at Indivisible every Thursday of the month through the election. RSVP at the link in the show notes for this week's episode. Join our live virtual taping with investigative journalist Craig Unger, author of American Compromise, on June 25th at 12 p.m. Eastern, and with cult expert Dr. Yana Lalick on July 11th, 8 p.m. Eastern. If you're in New York, attend our in-person live taping for the launch of In the Shadow of Stalin, based on the script for Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine, made possible with the help of useful idiots and corruption in the West like Putin's war today. Pre-order your copy of In the Shadow of Stalin from Oni Press, and look out for our live taping in New York soon. This election is here and it's happening, and it's bigger than Biden. We have the chance to hack away at corruption at the root by building our power at the all-important state level, where crucial quality of life issues, from voting rights to environmental protections to LGBTQ+ rights and more, are decided. Karl Rove ran the same strategy for the GOP during the Obama years, laying the groundwork for Trump to come to power in 2016. Now we're reversing this dangerous trend, securing key victories in swing states to protect our elections and advance progressive laws in states like Michigan and Wisconsin. Yes, even Wisconsin. Another world is possible when we unite and build together. Here's how. Join me, Andrea, at State Fair, a giving circle that collects small dollar donations among friends and family to build big power in key states. If 1,000 Gaslit Nation listeners set up a $5 recurring monthly donation, that's $5,000 we're sending to turn so-called red states purple and so-called purple states blue. Some of the races we've supported won by only a few votes. And we flipped the House in Pennsylvania, flipped the entire House, all right? Elected like 12 new people, massive. And they have a crazy, extra crazy Republican Party in Pennsylvania. And that's what we did together through States Project. Thank you. Your $5 monthly donation will make a huge difference. Join me and my friends at State Fair today. You can sign up at gaslitnationpod.com. Just click on the 2024 Survival Guide on our homepage. Step number 2, are there any young people in your life, Gen Z or younger? Give them the gift of the excellent book, Run for Something, a real talk guide to fixing the system yourself. It helps people of all ages run for office. So if you're thinking of running for office, be sure to read this inspiring and practical guide. Both the book and the organization, Run for Something, encourage, recruit, and train young people to run for office and flex their power. Inspire a young person and anyone you love and trust with empathy in their hearts and science in their minds to run for office today. Number 3, help the helpers. State Bridges is a sister district action network program in which volunteers from across the country fundraise for organizations doing year-round power building in key battleground states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. State Bridges supports organizations engaging communities underrepresented at the polls, like mothers of color, rural voters, and Latinx voters. Sign up to attend a virtual fundraiser and donate to help the helpers at State Bridges. Number 4, write letters to voters in swing districts with Vote Forward. Check out any of their easy letter writing campaigns that have already started and write letters as you listen to Gaslit Nation. We'll be keeping you company. Most importantly, number 5, check your own voter registration now at election protection site vote.org. Make sure you're registered and check in with your family and friends to confirm their voter registration too. Commit to helping 5 people in your life make a plan to vote and bring them along to a Gaslit Nation phone bank this fall, because the only ones coming to save us is us. Grassroots power is the most reliable power we have left. Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up at the Truth Teller level and higher on Patreon at patreon.com/gaslit. It's Pride Month. On behalf of everyone here at Gaslit Nation, we extend a happy Pride to all of our listeners in the LGBTQ+ community. You and your loved ones are not alone in this time of genocidal hate. The Gaslit Nation community has your back, and wherever you are listening, we love you. You're perfect. We're going to get through these dark times together. To help us do that, let's all come together and support these worthy organizations doing extremely important work for human rights. Lambda Legal is committed to achieving full recognition of civil rights for LGBTQ+ people and everyone living with HIV, to ensure legal protections and to end discrimination. Donate at lambdalegal.org. That's lambdalegal.org. And Lambda Legal also provides free services from those impacted who need the support. Trans Lifeline provides trans peer support that's been divested from police since day one. They're run by and for trans people. Donate at translifeline.org. That's translifeline.org. The Audre Lorde Project is a lesbian, gay, bisexual, two-spirit, trans and gender, non-conforming, people of color community organizing center focusing on the New York City area. Donate at alp.org. That's alp.org. The U.S. has the highest rate of maternal mortality than any other developed country. Christian nationalists, backed by the oil and coal lobby, worsen this crisis with their authoritarian abortion bans. Donate to the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project that provides support to those who need an abortion or emergency contraceptives. Donate at WRRAP.org. That's WRRAP.org. To help get Ukraine urgently needed humanitarian aid, join me in donating to Razom for Ukraine at razomforukraine.org. To help civilians and refugees in conflict zones, donate to Doctors Without Borders at doctorswithoutborders.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans, yes, that's how you say it, already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Andrea Chalupa. Our production manager is Nicholas Torres. And our associate producer is Carlin Daigle. Our episodes are edited by Nicholas Torres. And our Patreon exclusive content is edited by Taj Easton and Carlin Daigle. And a big warm welcome to Gaslit Nation's first ever artist in residence who will be with us through the summer of 2024, getting us ready for victory on November 5th. A big Gaslit Nation welcome to Jerica Miguel, the wonderful singer-songwriter. You can find her work at Jerica Miguel. That's JerikaMighelle.com. Her music is incredibly haunting. You heard it on the show at the very end of May, and you'll hear it again, getting us ready for the election. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going. Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle. Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smythe of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish. Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Work for Better, Prep for Trouble, that's right, Lily Wachowski, John Schoenthaler, Ellen McGirt, Larry Gasson, D. Scott, Ann Bertino, David East, Joseph Mara Jr., Mark, Sean Berg, Kristen Custer, Kevin Gannon, Sandra Collins, Katie Masuris, James D. Leonard, Leo Chalupa, Carol Golstad, Marcus J. Trent, Joe Darcy, Ann Marshall, D.L. Sinkfield, Nicole Spear, Abby Road, Jans Alstrup Rasmussen, Sarah Gray, Diana Gallagher, Leah Campbell, Jared Lombardo, Ann Marshall, Tanya Chalupa. Thank you all for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.